Should you play Devil May Cry 5 in 2024? Well, coming off of Devil May Cry 4 that released all the way back in 2008, this fifth entry in the series would finally release 11 years later on the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. Having recently gone through the past 4 DMC games myself, I was excited to see what the fifth game had in store. Even though this released only 5 years ago, I never got around to playing this on the last gen consoles, so I completely missed all the hype that was around the game when it first dropped. Nonetheless, let's talk about what makes Devil May Cry so good: the gameplay.
You taking notes? All right. Time to kick some ass.
With DMC 5 being the first main game in the franchise in a long time, I came in with the expectation of the game being improved upon from the fourth. If you play DMC 4, you already know how big the leap was from 3 to that game, and in my opinion, the same thing happened from 4 to 5. Putting it simply, this title feels like the culmination of everything that was built upon from the first game. Like every mechanic that was present since DMC 1 was implemented in the best way possible for this fifth title. A big issue I was hoping would be fixed in this was the camera. If you played the older games, then you know how much of a pain in the ass the camera was. From changing angles at the worst times to not revealing aerial enemies, in each title, the camera had issues. However, I feel like now it's finally been improved to the best it could possibly be. It's still not perfect, but that's not because of the mechanics surrounding the camera, but more with the environment. Many times when you're fighting enemies, you'll be in a variety of areas. Sometimes there'll be large open spaces, tight corridors, or small rooms. Regardless, you'll find yourself moving all over the place. Where the problem lies is when you line up your character or the enemy in front of certain pieces within the environment. When this happens, the camera moves to keep your character in view, as it should, but the debris or object in the area line up with the camera as well. It could be a wall, building, or something else, but the obstacle will completely fill up the camera and prevent you from seeing what's going on until you moved. This isn't a big deal when playing on normal like I did, but I can imagine if you're playing on one of the harder modes, then not being able to see could be the difference between life and death. Either way, if this is the biggest issue with the camera, I'll take it, because the overall camera system used to be a hell of a lot worse. When it comes to Devil May Cry, the combat is the heart and soul of the franchise. No matter which game you play, the hack and slash action combat is the reason why these games have the popularity they do. If you didn't already know, you play as 3 characters over the course of the story: Nero, Dante, and V. Again, if you play DMC 2 or 4, then you're already familiar with using various characters and how all of that is implemented into the gameplay. What I thought Capcom did a great job of was making the gameplay for each character actually feel different from each other. Every time I switched characters, I had to adjust my approach to the combat because some characters could do things that others couldn't. Since I like playing as each character, I wanted to highlight some of the things I felt were worth mentioning for each of their gameplay. As expected, you play as Nero, and his gameplay is very similar to what it was in DMC 4. To me, what makes Nero so special is that his Devil Breaker is so useful, and it's evident that Capcom thought the same thing. Before, you could only grab enemies with it, which I still love doing, but now Nero could attach different arms with various abilities that would completely change how you approach every combat scenario. Some arms were more melee focused, while others could slow down time. Add in the Red Queen and Blue Rose, and Nero has a plethora of attacks at his disposal. What makes the Devil Breaker better is that it feels natural to use in tandem with the sword and the gun. So if you like physical attacks, combine combos using the Red Queen and the Devil Breaker. For range attacks, just use the Blue Rose instead. It all works well and makes it easy to adjust when facing different enemies. When you play as Dante, it feels like you're right at home. Maybe because he's the main character of the entire series, but I could have skipped the tutorials and I would have known exactly what to do in regards to his combat. Just like DMC 4, you have access to the different styles and you could switch between them at any second, which makes the number of different combos seem infinite. Again, you could use the weapons like the pistols, shotguns, or rocket launchers, but if you played the older games, you probably could have guessed that. They feel about the same, but it's worth noting that you can use charge shots, which would do some added damage. You get some new melee weapons, but it's the differences between them that makes them so unique. Of course, you have the sword, nunchucks, and others, but they differ so greatly that it's easy to discern when and when not to use them. But what makes Dante so much fun to use is that he gets his upgraded demon form later in the game that makes him OP, at least on normal. Unlike the normal Devil Trigger, he doesn't regain health, but the damage in this new form is insane. The best way to describe it is like going from Super Saiyan 1 all the way to Super Saiyan 3. It takes a bit of time to get enough bars to activate it, but once you do, you'll shred almost anything that's in your path. Finally, we get to the newest addition in the game, V. When I first started up the game, I was like, who the hell is this? And I really didn't care about using him. But once I actually understood his combat, I liked it a lot. Instead of constantly being the aggressor in all the encounters, V's combat is a lot more passive aggressive, and it took a bit of adjusting to get used to. You have access to these two demonic creatures, which was pretty much a bird and a panther. These two are the main things that would be attacking the enemies instead of V. You give each of the creatures commands, and depending on the button combination inputted, they would perform a certain move. Afterwards, you can use V to finish off the enemies once they're stunned. This means that you're not actually fighting anything, you're just commanding other demons to fight for you. Personally, I enjoyed this type of gameplay a lot, even if I was a bit skeptical at first. But I completely understand if you didn't care for his gameplay because it's drastically different from what we're used to in a DMC game. A big reason I liked using him was because the giant demon that appears when using his devil trigger does massive damage and stays for a lot longer than you think. To make it even better, you're able to manually fill the devil trigger bars just by holding a button. In my opinion, if you can make the mental switch from attack, attack, attack to more of a defensive slash or evade mindset, you may enjoy V's gameplay. Now you may be wondering, okay, you just went through all of those characters and mentioned a lot of abilities, but can you upgrade any of those? And that would be a great question. Before, in order to upgrade anything, you have to access a divinity statue and use your red orbs to acquire the upgrade. But now they made it a lot more cinematic as a new character drives up and gives you access to a sort of workshop where you can purchase everything you need. This not only includes abilities, but items and weapons, all which could be slotted into different sets that could be equipped depending on the mission. Even though it's nothing new, being able to buy upgrades in the middle of the mission comes in clutch, especially after losing a lot of items or health during the fights. Speaking of health, this brings me to the one aspect of the gameplay that was changed that I couldn't get over, and that was the healing system. I could be mistaken, but I believe in every one of the main DMC games you had to use green vital stars to heal yourself when running low on health. These could be found all over the place within each mission or be bought via divinity statues. What had me confused in this game was that sometimes the health was inside green crystals or the crystals themselves were spread across an entire area. I didn't want the game to baby me, but going through each level, it seemed like there wasn't a whole lot of health pickups to find. Of course, some of them are right in front of your face, so they were hard to miss, but other times I found myself thinking, damn, where can I find some health at? To make matters worse, they removed the ability to purchase vital stars from statues in the workshop, but instead offer permanent health upgrades instead. You can still buy gold stars for revivals, but not having vital stars for sale just messed with my brain. It's like I couldn't wrap my head around it. It didn't make any sense. I think to offset this, the devs decided to allow you to use the red orbs to revive yourself, but I didn't think it was the same. I thought that when playing as Nero, you really felt the impact of this. Unlike Dante or V, you couldn't use the devil trigger and regain your health, so if you missed the health pickups, were low on orbs, or ran out of gold stars, you were in for a tough time. Unless there was a devil bringer arm that regained some of your health, you didn't have many options when using them. Maybe to others this isn't a big deal, but for some reason I never fully adjusted to this change during my entire playthrough. Another thing I thought was done really well was the boss fights. These have always been fun in the past games, but this game takes things to a whole nother level. All of these demonic creatures are different and pose various challenges compared to their counterparts. Mixing the fact you have to play as 3 characters, and the game does craft a solid challenge in regards to its bosses. If you played the older games, then you know that these fights didn't always take place in large, open areas. Many times you were in cramped rooms having to fight a boss that was complete BS, but now each fight is inside what feels like a small arena, giving you plenty of room to perform almost any action. I thought the fights themselves were all pretty good, but sometimes the attacks they performed felt a little cheap. Like there's a time where you're fighting a giant chicken, and one of its attacks is to just start flailing all over the place. The easy answer is to dodge, but with the camera going up and down constantly, it's actually hard to execute. This is just one example, but sometimes the attacks of the enemies can be a bit frustrating, but this can be remedied by just getting good. Lastly, I wanted to mention that Virgil is playable, but only in the special edition of the game. To me, his gameplay is the best out of all the characters, and it's not even close. He's fast and is able to deal lots of damage from both up close and far away. There's some other differences in his entire gameplay experience, but overall, he's just fun to play as. I'd say if you're going to buy this game, be sure to get the special edition so you can run through some levels with him because it's definitely worth it. The gameplay for DMC5 feels like the highest evolution of what has been established in the series thus far. Just about everything from before feels more fleshed out and smoother, which made the actual experience so much better. When it comes to the story, DMC continues that trend of having a simple and easy to understand plot. What I thought it did a good job of was establishing the power of the villain right from the start. The plot constantly jumps around between dates with times, with the game splicing itself together until you catch up to real time. I didn't mind this sort of storytelling because it's been done before. It was just crazy to see DMC have so many cutscenes and dialogue because it wasn't always like this. In the older games, there was no dialogue during the actual gameplay, as it always ended after each cutscene. Furthermore, the character interactions in 5 are diverse and continuously mix everyone together, which was great to see. All of the moments between each of them was worth watching, not because it had emotional impact, but because it was just cool to see Nero interact with Lady, or another pair speaking that normally doesn't come in contact with each other. Unfortunately, what I didn't like was what the plot ended up becoming. At first, it's about trying to kill an all-powerful demon that appears to be virtually unstoppable, but then it turns into something more predictable. What that is, I won't tell you, but what I will say is that by the time I hit the late game, the plot kinda felt like DMC 3.5. Even still, I thought the game did a solid job at leaving the door open to continue this game's story or open it up to a new cast of characters entirely. Personally, I would love to see a continuation with something not as predictable or a story that we haven't seen before. I don't expect too much since the stories for these games are never really fleshed out, but I feel like it's time this franchise takes a step in that direction, especially since it takes forever for these games to release. The last thing I wanted to mention was how good the game looked. With it releasing in the 8th console generation, this game featured beautiful graphics, especially compared to the older titles. The first thing I noticed was the character models. All of them looked realistic and almost lifelike, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact it was using the RE engine, which was the same as those Resident Evil remakes that have been releasing over the past couple years. I'm glad Capcom decided to use that engine because this title definitely benefited from it. Other than the characters, the enemies, environments, and effects all looked better than it ever has and had that typical flair that you would expect to see in a DMC game. Destroying crystals and smashing enemies all looked 3D and tangible, even though it wasn't. You may not have as much of an appreciation for the graphics if you didn't play the older titles, but when you look and compare how each of them look, the difference is staggering. Even using the HD collection as a reference, the upgrade in visuals is still night and day. Seeing Dante, Trish, and others finally look their best showed me what the devs always thought the characters should look like when the first game released all those years ago. Maybe I'm showing my age, but the older I get, the more I appreciate how good games look today because games used to look a lot worse. Regardless, this game is a treat to look at and the improved visuals added so much to the overall atmosphere. Overall, Devil May Cry 5 is an addicting experience that portrays the series at its best. Every facet of the game is improved from before, and it's apparent right from the opening cutscene. Outside of some small gameplay changes and a predictable story, there's not much in this game not to like. So that brings me to my question, should you play Devil May Cry 5 in 2024? That answer is yes. I think this is the best out of the main games and did a great job at improving what was established in DMC 4 all those years ago. Hopefully it doesn't take another 11 years for the next DMC game to release because DMC 5 deserves a proper follow-up. If I had to give this game a score, I would give it an 8.5. There's so much to like about this game with very few flaws, it's definitely worth a playthrough. What did you think about Devil May Cry 5? Did you like this game, or do you like one of the older games better? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you enjoyed the video, feel free to drop a like or subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.
Guess I'm the first one here. I like that.